Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to KW Property Management and Consulting's Community Association Best Practices Monthly Webinar. I'm your host, Tim O'Keefe, a partner with KW Property Management and Consulting. We all know Hurricane Ian came on shore as a Category 4 hurricane in Florida near downtown Fort Myers on September 28th. It's been a few weeks. The West Coast has experienced wind gusts up to 190 miles an hour. By the time Ian made its way through the state, it left millions of Floridians without power and water, causing 126 deaths in Florida and an estimated $67 billion of damage. And I think we're probably going to see that number rise. Today, we will get a firsthand account of the storm by our panelists, who either rode out the storm or were in Fort Myers immediately after the storm to help with recovery. They witnessed the devastation of Ian firsthand. We will focus our conversation today on what the properties can do to prepare for a storm, what they can do after the storm to ensure that their damaged property is reported immediately to their insurance carriers, and the best way to manage through the process and resolve your claim and recovery. Let's get started today by introducing you to our panelists. First, welcome back, Daniel Odess. As president of Global Pro, an insurance coverage expert offering insurance services for managing risk to recovery. We are here today to talk about how to recover after the catastrophic storm. Dan's company is currently helping dozens of West Coast properties to ensure their claims are resolved quickly and to the full extent of the damage created by Ian. So welcome back, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it, guys.
Has also joined us. Henry is the president and founder of Water Restoration Group, a KW property management company offering water restoration, mold removal, fire and smoke remediation, and asbestos abatement. WRG played a major role in the recovery of the KWPMC properties that got hit the hardest by Hurricane Ian. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much, guys.
And we also have Zuly Maribona. Zuly is a senior vice president and market leader for our Southwest Florida properties from Fort Myers, Naples, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville markets that were all hit the hardest by Hurricane Ian. Zuly and her team were on site before, during, and after the storm. Thanks for joining us today, Zuly.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I know you all have better things to do than to talk to me for the next 58 minutes, but I really appreciate you carving out time from the recovery process that you're in. Zuly, I want to come to you with the first question, but Dan, I'm just going to ask you a yes or no question, and then we'll get into it. Dan, is it too late to file an insurance claim on your damages?
No, it's not.
Okay, good. We'll get into that. All right. So Zuly, let me get started with you. For days, the weather services were all projecting that Hurricane Ian was going to land on shore in the Tampa area. Everyone was scurrying to Tampa. Even the Weather Channel put their best people in Tampa, and then they had to move them around. But Tampa's about 125 miles north of downtown Fort Myers. So KW manages properties in Marco Island, Naples, Fort Myers, Bonita Springs, Punta Gorda, Venice, Bradenton, St. Pete, all the way up to north of Tampa. So all up and down that West Coast. So as a storm approached, what preparation did the KW team under your direction do on the West Coast? And did it change as the storm started to change with the projection where it was coming on shore?
Thank you, Tim. So yes, I think three simple things that our team as a whole and as a company we do, and it boils down to being prepared, communication, and action, right? So depending on the market that we were in, we immediately went through our very thorough hurricane preparedness guide that we train our team throughout the entire hurricane season. And that really tells us, depending on where the storm is coming, the severity of the storm, what classification the storm is, whether it's a tropical storm, a hurricane, if it's a Category 1 and beyond, what action items we need to prepare for, what level of communication we need to have with our team. So first, we were preparing for the Tampa area, but we had already immediately taken action in all of our West Coast markets as well to be prepared for possible hurricane impact in all of our West Coast. That included the southern Southwest Florida market as well. That included Naples and Fort Myers. We were having daily phone calls with our team and all the way up to our partnership group. We were having training sessions with our on-site team to make sure that they understood what their shutdown procedures needed to be. We were keeping a very close eye to all of the emergency broadcasts that were taking place, all the way down to understanding the emergency powers of our boards having emergency board meetings with our board of directors, communicating daily, hourly, even with our residents, team members, and the emergency vendors, depending on what needed to take place. And again, Tim, I cannot emphasize this enough. Communication is key. And we did have very planned and executed communication plan with our residents and our employees on an almost hourly basis, depending on whether Tampa was our area of impact and when it changed over to Southwest Florida as well.
So would you have about 24 hours to redirect and say, okay, it's coming this way? So it sounds like enough preparation
Yes.
was already in process. So it didn't have to jump through hoops to get those properties ready because they were probably mostly ready anyway.
We were already preparing for the potential of an impact and change. We can't, just knowing history as well in Florida, we always know that there's that potential of a change. So we needed to make sure that we were ensuring that our properties were prepared.
And then how did that preparation help with the day after the storm? And okay, now it's come through and we know that there's significant damage. How did the preparation help with that?
So our hurricane preparedness guide is critical in any community, and making sure that you are thoroughly thinking out your plan. What happens before a storm, during a storm, and post-storm is extremely critical. The key vendors that you need to partner with, some of which are on this call with us today, and other critical vendors depending on the community type. If you're high-rise, your elevator companies, your landscape companies for our larger HOAs, and lifestyle communities, and making sure that those preemptive phone calls have been made to have them on site and ready to take a look at your mechanical systems in advance or after the storm. And the shutdown procedures for your properties are critical. Making sure that if your properties should have certain shutdown procedures, that we are able to execute on those as well.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Zuly. And I don't want to spend too much time on storm preparation. We did do a hurricane preparation webinar in June, and so we covered a lot of the ground that we are probably talking about now, but still important to understand that preparation helps mitigate damage at the end of the day. Dan, what else, from your perspective, Dan, you come in typically after the storm and you jump in and you're critical to putting properties back together and quickly and making sure that claims become a priority because it's a bit first come, first serve, but also having the right knowledge of somebody that understands how to maneuver through the insurance markets. But what can a property do beforehand, that before a storm arrives, that helps you post-storm, so that you've got the ability to say, here's before and after, let's get started, let's get the money as fast as we can and put this property back together?
Yeah, it's a hard go at it right now on some of these more remote areas, particularly on the Sanibel, Captiva, Fort Myers Beach area, where you had major devastation. And one thing that we constantly talk about, and we reiterate at every one of these town hall meetings or these webinars, is about access. Access to units is so important. And right now, you have a lot of smaller management companies that just were really not positioned to provide access in the wake of this, and they're using excuses like their internet is down, their phones are hard to get a hold of, and then now that the internet back up in a lot of areas, and some of these remote areas that were really heavily hit, but the Bonita area, Venice, and access is there. Now they're coming to realization they never actually had the access they needed to begin with, and they were just really kind of punting. So access. We say it all the time. And access is not only to the units, but also records, whether that's the policies or contact information for unit owners. It's remarkable how many associations to this day have no actual copy of their insurance policies, despite how easy it is to transmit this stuff electronically with a click of a button and store it in one of these free services like Dropbox or Box.com or one of these other services. You could so easily do it, and it's right there. It's just to me, it's just a lack of planning, a lack of focus, laziness, and then also for some of these management companies just not servicing their associations the way that they should be. So access to units, access to records is so paramount. And I can tell you right now, in a couple instances, we had, just absolute devastation to a couple of our associations. They're just, we couldn't get the claim notice because you didn't even know who the insurance company was, and the manager was did not have access to the records. It was remarkable to see it happened in this day and age, when everything is again, like I said, transmitted electronically. Everyone has cell phones. How is it that you don't have the cell phone number, emergency contact information for people to be able to check on them to make sure they're still alive, that they still, or to at least to let them know that what's going on the ground at the properties. It's just incredible to me.
Yeah, and so we're going to spend a lot of time on kind of the recovery side of things. And I know Dan's at one of the properties KW manages now in Punta Gorda that was hit probably the hardest of all of our properties, and it's been there for quite a while. So we thank you for the service that you're providing that community, and you being away from your family to, help put things back together in some of these properties. It's very important. Henry, from your perspective, what service is available from the Water Restoration Group to ensure that a condo or an HOA can be a priority after the storm? What can you put in place that allows a property to be at the top of the list at WRG so that you're going to respond quickly to them?
Well, we have a preferred client program called a PCP that certain clients sign, and that gives them priority, moves them to the top of the line. Because as you know, after these storms, you have, a long list of buildings waiting for service. And I'm sure you've experienced that some communities, that some vendors that say they're going to show up and they don't show up. So it's important to have these agreements in place. And more importantly, it's also the contract with the vendor, get that done before the storm, because I've had situations in which we're going back and forth with attorneys forever on the contract, and all this does is delay the mitigation of the damages at the property. So for anybody wanting to be at the front of the line, you got to sign a preferred client program, whether it be with WRG or with the vendor of your choice, but make sure you have some sort of agreement with them. It definitely helps you.
And what's it cost to sign that agreement, Henry?
$0.
$0. So it gives you, and what's the benefit that it gives you too by having signed that document?
Besides the priority response, is you get discounts, year round. So without getting into a hurricane, you just year round, you're going to get 10% off, and you're going to get up to $10,000 worth of free mold remediation work. So it's definitely a money saver, and it helps you out. So we came up with a $10,000 mold clause, I guess you should call it, because a lot of the communities have a limit on their mold coverage. So we tried to figure out a way to give the community more coverage for their mold remediation work. And that's why we put that in this agreement.
Okay, that's a good idea. At least, again, all part of preparation. Now that the storm has hit, that's all the before. So, we had the during the storm, when winds reach a certain level and the storm is here, everybody needs to really be sheltered and have shelter in place, be safe, and make sure that you are in a safe place. I think this storm that we had, because of the storm surge, unfortunately, we lost a lot of lives in the state of Florida. But, part of it, my public service announcement for everybody on this call: if you're in an evacuation zone, get out. Don't write it out. Don't be a hero. Get out of town. Move to higher ground. Get 15 miles inshore. You could save your life just by getting in your car and driving 20 minutes. That doesn't seem like a lot, but once it's too late, it's too late. And unfortunately, we lost a lot of lives because people weren't well prepared, and they didn't take the advice of government officials to move on. So, just do the right thing, do what's right for you. But it's heartbreaking to hear the amount of lives that could have been saved had people just done the right thing. So, from a public service standpoint, I encourage that in the future. So, now that the storm has come and gone, Zuly, we wake up Thursday morning, it's the sun's up. It looks like a beautiful Florida day, but you look outside and you live there. You've been there for many hurricanes. You just see total devastation. What do you do? What was your first thing that you started to work on Thursday morning when you got up and realized, your home's still there, your family's safe? What do I do for all my employees and all of our customers that we manage?
So it's a couple of things, and it's it's a difficult time. That was a very difficult time for all of us here in Southwest Florida, and for all of us all around the state of Florida looking at all of this. But obviously making sure that we are taking a safety check for all of our employees that we know remained on site. So that's very important. And two is how quickly can we get out to our properties? So are the roads safe enough for us to get out there and do our property inspections? And I'm very proud of our team here in Southwest Florida. I don't get tired of saying this, Tim, because we were very quick to be boots on the ground and be out on property, taking those post-storm pictures and post-storm inspections at the vast majority of our associations where it was absolutely safe to do so. And that is a very critical step as well, both pre-storm records, but also post-storm records, to make sure that we have a very good grasp as to what has happened at our associations. Again, first, safety, but second, to make sure that we get out to our associations as soon as it is safe to do so. And that was one of the first things that our team did do. And we were able to mitigate at least the extent of the damage and start communication. Very critical to have communication. And in the instances where our team here in Southwest Florida did not have access to do so, we had obviously critical implementation plan to be able to communicate from our outside offices in other cities within the state of Florida here to communicate on our behalf internally, and making sure that our residents and our boards were informed every step of the way of what we were finding and what the next steps were.
And just to get an idea of, the audience that we have today, and the poll questions that were asked and have been answered. So one of the questions was your property impacted by Hurricane Ian? And 42% said yes, 58% said no. Did you lose power and or water? 34% said yes, and 66% said no. And then, has your power been restored? 32% said yes, 8% said no, and 61% weren't affected by it because they may have been outside the cone. We have people from throughout the state that listen to these webinars, so not everybody was necessarily affected. And then the question was asked, have you or will you file an insurance claim? And 29% said yes, 71% said no. And then, has your community filed or will they file an insurance claim? 41% said yes, 59% said no. And you believe your community's insurance policies will cover the damage incurred? 31% said yes, 18% said no, and 51% said it's not applicable because you're not going to be filing a claim. So, Dan, to that point, when you have a storm like this come through, like what's the approach that you now take? Okay, I've got all this damage. I'm going to call my insurance carrier and tell them what? And then what happens after that call? And you think you have insurance, they're going to come out and write you a check. So what's the real process?
Well, Tim, you must know a little something about insurance claims, because you started off on the right foot. You said, call my insurance carrier. We have noticed that and something we are well aware of. Obviously, the typical course of action by most property management companies, as well as board members, is to call their insurance agent. And the reality, though, is that you have a contract. Your policy of insurance is a contract, and in that contract, it stipulates who and what needs to be communicated to a particular company or individual that will handle the administration of claims. And it's very specific. Particularly after Hurricane Irma, we all learned a real hard lesson where you have these multi-layered insurance policies that have many, many different insurance companies on them. And there was a couple of associations who actually just gave notice to their broker, and a defense by some of the layers of the insurance program was that they never got the notice. And unfortunately, the onus is on the policyholder, not the broker, to make sure that claims are reported to the proper place and made appropriately and timely. And it's timely, which is important, not immediate. Timely notice is all you're required to give. Immediate notice is someone, the building is still on fire and we're calling our insurance agent or broker. You should be focused on the health, life, and safety of your unit owners. You should be focused on mitigation efforts. You should be collecting information, photographs, as Zuly mentioned, documenting. It was so impressive how many photographs and videos we got from the KW team at the various properties we went to. It was clear that they were instructed and practiced this and discussed it prior to Hurricane Ian, it was just very easy to get the information. For click of a button, I was getting policies, I was getting documentation. And in some instances where they had contacted the broker, we come to find out that the broker hadn't even turned around and actually noticed the insurance companies directly of it. So look in your policies to where you're supposed to give notice of it. But when you're giving that notice, pay particular attention to the fact that there isn't a policy I've ever seen sold to a community association that requires that notice be sent in writing. It only states that it needs to be given by phone call almost in every instance. Now, there may be an email address there or a website, but the reality of it is that there is no set requirement in any commercial policy I've ever seen for a community association that actually stipulates that an accord form or some email needs to be sent. Why is that important? Because notice of a claim is really where we see most of the issues first occur, and what leads to a lot of delays, underpayment, and denial of losses. You, as property managers or interested unit owners or board members, are not experts in insurance. Most of you probably don't even have access to the actual and complete certified copy of the policy. So you're unaware of coverages and issues and pitfalls and the particular language used in a policy to exclude coverage. Because most often a policy only tells you what it excludes, and most often doesn't tell you what it actually includes. So you got to understand how to navigate those things, and you can really say things that can hurt your claim. So giving that proper notice and only sticking to the things that you know. Don't be an expert. Don't try to to generalize things in a way that mitigates your damages by attaching adjectives to things and other subjective statements like, well, it's not as bad over there, but it's really bad over there. Either one of those statements is not good. The fact of the matter is you have damage, and that's it. So when you're giving notice and you're as a representative for an association to an insurance company, it's important that you stick to what you know. What you know is that you have damage, that you sustain damage. What you are covered for, you don't know. You're not an insurance coverage expert. You're not there analyzing the coverages, the policies, looking at language that can or should be, can be used against you, and the denial or limitations of coverage, or that should be used to benefit you, that leads to the actual coverage for your loss and damages. But getting in and out of units, documenting things, working with your contractors like Henry, WRG, companies like theirs that are so responsive, they have the adequate resources, they're not overextending themselves, they're not trying to take on every job. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a, it's one of those situations where you're seeing a lot of contractors overpromise, way under deliver, and they're going to hurt policyholders. So looking at your vendors, one thing about vendors, and one thing that I constantly have to keep reiterating since Ian hit here, dealing with law association, is how important it is to note on documentation that's submitted to you by your actual contractors, the people that are trying to help you rebuild or mitigate your damages, is that it stipulates on there somewhere that it is from Hurricane Ian. Not that it's flood, or not that it's wind or wind-driven rain or anything else. Specifically just state Hurricane Ian. That's it. It's really, really important for record keeping, not only today, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, when there's requests made for this information as it relates to placing new insurance in the future. It will come back to bite you if you do not properly document these things, not only in your claim, but also the future placement of insurance. So now's the time to make sure this stuff is done right. So make sure those documents and records say Hurricane Ian, and also make sure that those records are compliant with the policy conditions set forth under what's called the duties in the event of a loss provision. Check it out, look for it in your policy. It'll state in there how you have to make a claim, but it talks about as unit pricing, quantities, total amounts, sums of information, direct descriptions of materials or labor services provided. It will literally specifically state what needs to be included. If you're a contractor or your company, that whoever you hire to try to help you mitigate or rebuild from this loss is not submitting documentation compliant with those policy obligations, again, it's going to slow your claims process down. It's going to lead to underpayment and possible denial of your loss.
So it's safe to say that most properties don't truly understand their coverage until after an event like this, and then you find out very quickly what's covered and what's not covered. But so you get the storm that comes through, and you got, because of the storm surge, a lot of flooding, and then that's where Henry's group comes in from the water restoration group. So Henry, like, you and Dan reconcile this for me. So I'm calling Henry and saying, Henry, I need you to come out and get the property. And Henry's going to be like everybody, provides a service wants to get paid for a service. So, Henry shows up. How's Henry know he's going to get paid? And when's he going to get paid? Is he going to get paid tomorrow for the service he provides? Is it going to take 6 months? Like, how do you reconcile the vendors and services that you need to put yourself back together?
That's a good question, Tim, and that's a tough one. It's a tough one.
He waves his magic wand and it just appears.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're there to try to help, and that's a concern that everybody has, right? How much is this going to cost? When am I going to get paid? Those kind of questions. So what we try to do is work with the clients, and a couple of properties, or a few of the properties that we're working for KW. We've just worked out a certain deal with the client to where they're not taking on any risk on stuff that's not paid for by the insurance company. So we're taking that risk on, and we're working with Dan, and so that kind of gives us a little sense of comfort, because we're communicating with him constantly and saying, hey, is this something we can do or we can't do? And Dan will tell us, yes, you can do that, or no, you can't do that. So we try to work together with Dan so that for the property to feel a little bit more comfortable as to their out of pocket, so they know that they're limited to their deductible, and that they know they're not taking a risk on coverage, because another vendor can come in, sign the contract, do all the work, send the bill for $1 million, and the insurance company says, I'm only going to pay you $600,000 of this. Now all of a sudden your client is on the hook for another $400,000 out of pocket. So that's what we don't want them. We don't want that situation. So at the end of the day, this is a relationship business, as you know it. So we sit down with the managers, and on a couple of these properties with the attorneys, and go back and forth on a contract and an agreement that works for everybody, where they feel comfortable, we feel comfortable, and we move forward. So this is an ideal situation where we have Dan involved. We know that he knows the insurance side, we know the mitigation side, and the most important thing is trust. So that client needs to know that we're here to help you, not to hit a home run on your job. We're here to do what's best for you. So it's a tough one.
So for all the listeners today, if you have a question while we're talking, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and ask your questions. So I'm going to jump to, we got a number of questions prior to getting started today. And so Dan, I'm going to come to you with this from Robert in Bradenton. He has a really good question. What are the coverage implications when a property has losses as a result of wind and flood damage, and both policies are on the hook or allegedly on the hook? Are we finding that the carriers are going to be pointing fingers at each other saying it was a wind-driven event? No, it was a water event, flood. Which policy is going to take precedent, or can they work together to cover all of the damages that happen within a property?
So if we take a macro view or approach at this, a lot of people will say if a pipe broke on an upper floor and water, trickled down through the building, let's say 10 floors, they say, oh my God, our building got flooded. Well, that in itself is not a flood, right? So you have water, you have flood, you have wind and rain, and then you have hurricanes, and then you have named storms, then you have wind other storms. You have all these various different ways in which insurance companies have, divisively carved out and limited coverages based on what the layman will typically state or use in everyday conversation. And unfortunately, they're utilizing words and terms and creating things and assigning definitions to them, which overly complicates the process. So when it comes to flood versus wind, it's a wind being hurricane. It's an age-old argument and issue. And really where the ground floor of all of that is with these what's called a slab claim, where the property's gone. The property, all you see out there is the slab, hence the slab claim. And then this major investigation and battle of the experts ensues, where we as advocates for policyholders will go out to determine to the extent that flood could have caused the collapse or failure of the building, the total catastrophic loss of the building, versus the flood, which may have caused it, versus the wind. So, and there's many different things, whether engaging meteorologists to provide, intimate and very specific diagrams of conditions at an actual location, involving wind engineers to explain the impacts of winds or pressures, because it's not just only the wind, it could be the barometric change in pressures that they focus in on, Temperature change is a big one as well. Location in and around other tall buildings in the middle of an urban core area. And then you get into some of the other mechanics of how the building was actually built. Does it have wood trusses or aluminum trusses? Is it block wall? Is it filled? Is it poured? How was it anchored? And looking at the anchor areas. So we have several of these claims already going on the Sanibel area that we've been engaged with. And the Valley Experts is on, to say the least. And now for lesser damaged properties that are not slab claims, really where you want to go to is your flood line. That usually, if the building is not a total loss, it was not catastrophic loss of the building itself, is usually let's say the equator between the area in which we claim flood versus what and everything in and above that would be considered wind damage. Now I'm generalizing it. There's no perfect science to it, and each situation is very different. So that's the caveat. As you get up into the building and you start looking at damages, the insurance company and engineers like to use these terms of art, one of which we just became more familiar with after the 2017 storm season, which is called wind-driven rain. Suddenly, hurricane damage was something other than hurricane damage. And they created these carve-outs and caveats to situations where water got into a building and where the insurance company, not the policyholder, but the insurance company could not determine how the water got into the building. And they would blame it on weep hole designs and windows and doors. And a very long, very technical conversation that I'm certainly not going to digress into right now. But what we're looking for is wind created openings. We're looking at failures in the windows and doors and the roof systems. We're looking where soffits have been totally blown out and water has gotten into the attic system and onto the drywall and the insulation in there. We're looking for the operation of windows and testing that. We're looking at plumbness of the windows. We're looking at mechanisms even though the window may be operable, maybe suddenly the window is creaking or making noise. That's a telltale sign of possible issues that may have been caused by, or contributing factor may be the actual wind, its pressures and other factors in it. You're looking for separations and waterproofing in and around the windows cracking. You're looking for gaskets that are ingested in the windows, rotating mullions, all these different parts and things and very specific things that we're looking for that may represent themselves as that wind created opening, where the water access to property and cause damage to the interiors, and therefore it's not a wind-driven rain claim or an issue as defined under the modern day policies. They've gone back as from the 2017 storm and about 2019, updated a lot of these wind-driven rain provisions to more broadly state that they include actual hurricane damages, where it is that the insurance company can't determine it. Now, U.S. policyholders in Latin, I'll finish on this, Tim, and I'll pass it back to you. The insurance obligation is to prove damage. It's not to be an expert in construction and in engineering or insurance coverage. You're there to prove damage. So you simply allow them access, cooperate, and prove your damage. I have wet drywall, my windows aren't working, my stucco's falling off, my roof's blown apart. That's your obligation. There's other specific details of what to do now with that information under that duties in the event of loss provision. But generally speaking, that's what you need to do. And that's where all of our focus should be.
And then do you, and with your expertise, do you hold the proper insurance policy accountable then? Could you, like, who has to go and say, this much is going to be attributed to wind, this much to flood, and
Yep.
who's the one that's mediating that?
Yeah, that requires a lot of our expertise as insurance coverage experts and our team of general contractors, engineers, and adjusters will dive into those things and look at coverage issues based on precedent. The precedent is what's in that contract. The precedent's also common in case law, and that all lead to the interpretation of or the intent of the policy of the contract that policy you bought. So all of that needs to be considered and obviously engineering principles, construction principles, adjusting principles, all goes into doing it. It's not just as simple as just reporting it and sitting back and saying, let's just see what the insurance company is going to do for me today.
So I know, Henry, it looks like you're answering a question from Bernard in Naples, but the question is basically, we had a water problem, like we lost power, electrician restored power. 3 days later, we ended up having a fire at the electric panel. So is that covered? I'll ask the question a little bit differently than the way Bernard answered it. Is that covered by your hurricane coverage, or is that just a normal claim that comes in? And is there a difference, Dan, between attributing that fire to a hurricane versus just attributing it to some other event with the electrical panel going bad?
So when it comes to mechanical failures, things like that occurred days after a storm, that is your date of loss, the day in which it occurred, and then you need to report it to most often your mechanical coverage, your equipment breakdown. It goes under various different names, boiler machinery. Sometimes people refer to that is your date of loss. I've gone on. I've handled many of these claims. We've published articles on this issue. A lot of people sometimes, unfortunately, state that when their pumps fail weeks, if not months, maybe a year after the storm, and they're like, oh, well, it was submerged in water. That's from Hurricane Ian or from the flood. But the reality is when we pull it apart and we look at the board and there was a burn mark in the middle of the board, which led to the failure of the pump, that date in which it failed is the date of the loss, and it's filed under the appropriate policy. It does not matter that they're submerged. A lot of these equipment and materials are in fact built to be watertight and be susceptible to water. Just because it was submerged, people make the miscalculated decision to chalk it up as hurricane related, but it's not. That should be a new claim under a new data loss, subject to only that deductible. And that's what's really important here, is because those claims carry a much lesser deductible. So when you mischaracterize your actual loss as something other than the mechanical failure it is, you're going to end up with a heck of a lot less money, and you're not protecting the fiduciary interests of your unit owners and your board.
So Vicky in Vero Beach asked the question, how does the property fund deductibles?
Well, how do they fund deductible? For me?
I don't know. Zuly, you want to answer it?
Yeah. There's you should get this. I mean, there's disaster credit lines. There's
Right.
Before you're looking to fund your deductibles, I think you should be looking to determine what the extent of your damages are. I think that's first.
Right. So, I mean, beyond what Dan just said, I think there's various ways. Obviously, you have to look at how much cash surplus you do have, depending on the extent of your deductible as well. We have been working very closely with some of our associations that have had extensive damage to as well arm them with potential lines of credit to help them with some of those deductibles. So that would be one avenue, is working with the lenders and banking institutions on what level of line of credit or loans that you can have. What you have in reserves as far as insurance deductibles. At times you do have associations that have funding in reserves for those matters as well. So there's varying ways. No one likes to talk about special assessments, and neither do we. So that's definitely not an avenue we want to go towards, but there are varying ways to fund for a deductible.
So thank you for that, Zuly. So Henry, I'm sure there's a lot of properties that feel like, well, we got a little bit of damage. We got a little bit of water. Wasn't that bad. We only got 3 or 4 inches. Seems like everything's dried up now. Like, what's happening, behind the wall? Like, what is your recommendation to people that think that, at what point do you say we probably need to have, a mold remediation expert or water restoration company come in, at least take a look at what happened during the storm to make sure that we're taking care of the properties, that we don't have a real problem with mold in 3 months, 6 months, somewhere down the road?
Well, you definitely want to have someone, a professional, come and check for moisture in the building, so we have teams of moisture mapping people that's what they're doing. They're going and checking every unit and seeing if there's moisture in those units. Some buildings, to your point, some buildings don't think there's much damage because they don't see much, but we've had the situation which, they don't see anything, so they don't ask us to go in the units, and then Dan goes to take a look at something and he notices, okay, there's moisture here, there's moisture there, so it's not to the naked eye. Many of these units look fine, but there's a lot of water running behind those walls. So definitely have someone check it out.
So just don't assume by the naked eye it looks like it's fine. It's important to have somebody come out and take a look at it. If you had water intrusion. And it doesn't have to be at the first level. If you have wind-driven rain, it could be inside some of the units. And, this is the time of year when a lot of Southwest Floridians are not in town. They're snowbirds. So it's important, as Dan mentioned at the top of this program, get access, go in and make sure that everybody's units are dry and do a moisture check inside the units. That's important to do that.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question for you, Zuly, because Philip in Wesley Chapel has a very interesting question about whether or not we'd recommend neighboring properties, kind of help neighbors helping neighbors form a neighborhood emergency framework to sustain itself for 2 to 3 days after a storm. And if so, what resources do we recommend establish that residents have some training about what they need to do, what they can do?
Thank you, Tim. So I happen to know that in that area, some of our associations are working on neighborhood captains as well, and a specific training in the event of a disaster similar to Hurricane Ian or the like. In the Pasco County area and in other counties around the state of Florida, there's also the CERT team, and that's a community emergency response teams that are actually trained similar to what the neighborhood captains would be. Those are citizen volunteer groups, and most of them would be residents of the community. And residents from outside of the community, typically they come from neighborhoods, they come from church groups and other organizations in the cities. And they're actually trained to recognize and to respond and recover from emergency and disaster situations. So we have those in other large associations, and they're very responsive. They do train specifically in the event of an emergency and how to help not only the residents in the community, but also our management team. And sometimes they're part of our response team when we're on site after a storm. So that would be a recommendation and one that we're working on as well for our communities in the area. I hope that helps. And to repeat, it's CERT. It's a community emergency response team.
So you don't have to recreate the wheel. Most counties have the CERT, CERT, yes. And those teams will help train you, and you can make it have a committee within different communities, have a CERT committee, and have people volunteer to go out and participate. And then you can help your neighbors and call your neighbors, have your manager call the manager or the board president, call the president next door to the building and say, we're doing this. We'd like for you to participate. Would you be willing to? It's such a great thing to be able to offer help to each other that I think most properties would probably gladly participate. And so that you're ready for a situation like this. So Dan, we're going to get back to some of the questions that were asked in advance. So Peter in Naples asked, and it may be a little self-serving, so I'll ask you anyway, is it advisable to hire a public adjuster?
I don't think that's self-serving. I think it's common sense these days. If you look at it in a macro view, everyone and anyone sent out by an insurance company does not represent the interest of a policyholder. So that is the independent adjuster, the company adjuster, and all the experts and everyone else that they send out to your community association do not represent or have the interest of the association in mind. They are there on behalf of the insurance company who you already gave your money to, and now you're asking them basically pay you back and obviously make good on their promise to make you whole. So without representation, now you are at the behest of individuals that are licensed, trained to only represent the interest of the insurance company. Your property manager, your broker, and everyone else that you may think, even your attorney, that want to help you are also not licensed to actually represent the interest of the association. They're there to help you. They're going to help you through the process. They're going to do what they have experienced or what they think is in your best interest. But again, they're not there as your legal representation in the actual adjustment. They're not going to go out and ascertain the amount of your damages, which is, in simple terms, figure out how much damage I have to prove to my insurance company. They're not going to do all the things that I discussed or that I broke down with regards to inspecting and investigating your windows and doors or the roofs and all other things, get up inside the attic system. Your brokers, which typically where sits in between the deal, where they have a relationship and contract actually to sell insurance for a company versus the AOR that you sign for them to act on and in your behalf to actually go to market and to obtain product. They're there to sell you a product. They're not there or licensed to adjust a claim. In fact, the law in Florida says that they can only legally adjust a claim on behalf of an insurance company if in writing, if they receive authorization in writing from the insurance company. So again, think of it as board members, as managers, you're fiduciaries. And as fiduciaries, you're going to be making decisions or influencing the insurance company's decision to pay an association money to make repairs at its properties. But again, you're not licensed nor equipped with the expertise to do that. So there's plenty of proof out there. There was investigations done after Hurricane Wilma as to the impact of public adjusting, where it showed that in the event of a major disaster like a hurricane, with the representation of a public adjuster, you're going to get 500 to 700% more than if you do it yourself. Now, it's not just about getting more, it's about getting what you're entitled to. And that's really what it was about. Fraud is not as rampant as it may, you may see it in the headlines or may talk about it. In fact, I challenge you to go on the Department of Financial Services website and actually find public adjusters that have committed fraud. It's not as prevalent as you might think. Because most of that fraud is actually being committed by insurance agents that are not selling property insurance. It usually has to do with health and life and other things like that. It's on the agency side, not the adjusting side. But all public adjusters are not built the same, and they're all certainly not the same. There are some that do a lot of homeowner claims and they blow in and blow out. They're like stormtroopers. There's those that have resources and built a team of licensed professionals like ourselves that are there to actually advocate and understand the difficulties and complexities of a commercial policy that's sold to a community association. You have bylaws, you have common law, you have case law, you have the not only the corporate statutes, you have the insurance statutes under 626, you have the 558 statutes in construction, which honestly they do sometimes get in effect because you have a ongoing construction project, you have issues and difficulties, and you know how to navigate those things. There's so many things that go on with a community association's claim. Not having a representation, I think, is a tremendous mistake, particularly in this type of market. In a hard market where you're paying more for less coverage and these policies are so complicated, you're essentially at times adjusting a claim based on sublimits, not even the limits of the policy. So you need to know where to look for that stuff, how to interpret those things, what isn't coverage, where am I wasting my time, where's my time best invested, and how am I going to do the best for my association to make sure that they fully financially recover for this. So if I do a special assessment or I hit a credit line, that I'm actually doing it because I have to, and not because we made a mistake in the representation of our damages.
So a follow-up question from Peter, who asks a question about, would you suggest hiring a public adjuster? I think the answer is certainly yes. Do you know a good one? We'll make sure Dan gives his contact information at the end of this call so you can get that information, Peter. But then Peter and Doug ask a similar question around pricing for public adjusters. Peter's question is, do public adjusters, would they work on a contingency basis? I don't know that you'd want to do that. And then Doug asked the question, will a public adjuster be flexible on their rates for a large scale recovery project? So there's price and there's value. So let's approach it from that standpoint and how we answer the question.
So state stipulation is in a state of emergency for 1 year following a major disaster like this. That's the governor declares a state of emergency. Public adjuster fees are capped at 10%. They can charge as much as 10% for that first year. Thereafter, it's up to 20%. And there's statute of limitations now with hurricane claims. That's then not relevant right now for this conversation. But in this first year following Hurricane Ian, from September 28th, 2022 through 2023, public adjusting fees are capped at 10. You bring up a good point, Tim. Everyone is there's someone out there always willing to do something cheaper. And if prices are only consideration when choosing someone to act in your behalf in your best financial interest, then you're probably off in the wrong direction. Making sure that you have not only the best price, but the best possible service at the price for which you're willing to pay is what's important here. Making sure that you are affording your association the best service is, I think, really important as a board member, that you can feel confident in the decision of who you retain, not just because you got it cheap. Getting it cheap doesn't typically end very well for associations. And there's many out there that can probably tell you about being self-managed or trying to go with a lesser management company than KW, and the disaster that it creates to them with regards to compliance obligations under the law. They just don't have access to the resources. They don't have the connections to vendors. and to be able to pool the resources, particularly in a disaster like this. Just the same goes to public adjusters. Well, a public adjuster may come in and say, hey, I'll do it for 5% or 7%. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have the actual resources to be able to properly advocate for you. And you're probably paying less today to pay more tomorrow. And so if you're getting such a significant deduction on those costs or fees up front, it usually means that the case is more than likely going to get shoved into appraisal or litigation at some point, which brings with it additional expenses. So while you think you're getting a discount today, you're actually end up costing yourself hundreds of percentages more in the long run. Now, again, check references, check licensing obligations, see how long that public adjuster has been licensed, see who's with them on their team doing the work for that's going to do the work for you in your association, making sure they have the actual competency to be able to do these things. Because again, just like any other vendor out there, it's not a one size fits all. We are built at Global Pro to advocate and represent as community associations. That was the objective and focus over 10 years ago when I started the company, and it continues today. More than 1,200 associations, $1 billion in recovery. So that's where we're at. Doesn't mean we're the only one. The competition is good, but again, check your references, check the licensing, check the competency, ask the questions, understand who they are, and you know, are the fees negotiable? Yes, of course, but it doesn't mean that you should be again price hunting first. I think you should lead with service. And then obviously discuss with the public adjuster if it's a possibility. Your situation may not be one, and the public adjuster should be sure to be giving an honest answer in that regard.
And so thanks for that, Dan. Joyce in Fort Myers is asking a question. Zuly, I'll turn this over to you. That she's asking, is there any funding available for their condo for removal of downed trees and bushes? So basically landscaping damage. She's suggesting that they're facing about a $60,000 bill to remove all of the damage that they had. So is there, and I know that you can get landscaping insurance, but it's minimal. It may be $2,500 you know, for the incident. So it really doesn't put much of a dent in a $60,000 claim. But are you aware of anything else, Zuly, that would help provide funding for removal of downed trees and bushes?
So I know that, I mean, beyond whatever they may have in their operating budget in excess of funds that they may need to expense or may need to use to expense that, just today, and we'd be happy maybe, Tim, to provide that link separately, maybe on the chat. Just today, we've had some conversations internally as to some FEMA funding that is being made available. And I think the extension is out for an additional 60 days on pickup of debris. And I believe that it is out not just to the individual homeowners, but it is also extended out to associations. I know that we are providing that information out to our associations as well. So that is another avenue, depending on the amount. Dollar amount of the expense and the extent of the debris removal, that is another avenue that is worth looking into for some of the associations out there. That is something that everyone can also look at on their own through the FEMA website. There is an application that needs to be completed in order to apply for that.
All right, thank you. Now, follow up to that, Dan. Stephen Fort Myers is asking, can you address the role FEMA plays in recovery, specifically filing a claim and claims processing?
So FEMA is the entity within the government that administers the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. They manage it. They manage it though through third parties. These third parties you'll see on your flood policies, Colonials, like to name one of them, Right Flood is another. Those are what's called the acronym. The federal government loves acronyms. It is called a WIO, Write Your Own. And they are the third-party administrators of that. They then hire subsequent third parties to them, which are called independent adjusters. They're flood adjusters that run around on behalf of the WIO to obviously be their eyes and ears in the fields and submit reports as to what they find. So FEMA is at the top. FEMA FEMA administers the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program. It falls within that government agency. And that agency then hires and outsources to these other WIOs. And then when there's losses and damage, they then engage third party or independent adjusters to go out and adjust the claims. Under the agency, under FEMA, there's various other programs. So one of them is the NFIP. The other one is the one that that Zuly just mentioned and hit it straight on with regards to the loan programs and things like that. And other relief programs. They do a whole small business thing. There's just a lot of different programs under FEMA. One of them being the NFIP. The NFIP policies are publicly available on the federal website. The guidelines are there. We've provided KW a kind of a hit list. We took hundreds of pages of policies and boiled it down to about 7 pages from what we think is important as it relates to Hurricane Ian. And one of the important things to note is that just this past week, finally, the federal government extended the deadline for proof of loss for 1 year from September 27th, I believe is the date they used, until 2023, which is important because for a typical flood claim pursuant to the policy, you have 60 days to submit the totality of your claim and sign and swear to the amount that you're asking to be paid for those damages. So that period has been extended for a full year by the federal government, and it did require that. It was while the president of the United States was actually visiting the site here. So we were waiting for that. It happened. It's typical of major disasters like this, which is really important. But if you have a flood loss, and I would calendar that date, because while you may think you already know what your damages are, or you may think in the next couple of weeks, it's amazing how these things pop up. And if you do want to submit a supplement, it has to be done before that deadline.
Okay, thank you. So we just have a couple minutes left. So I want to hit some of the questions. If we could go quickly with some questions and answers here. Marcia is asked from Daytona Beach is asking, Dan, is there anything we can do to prevent insurance companies from canceling our policy?
It has nothing to do with claims, despite popular belief that filing claims on property insurance leads to cancellation. Quite frankly, that's actually not a basis for canceling policy. Now, the reason why most policies get canceled following major disaster is because that insurer is actually leaving the market or no longer wants to be in a particular part of the market. Has almost nothing to do with actually making a claim, unless you're in the business of making claims. If you're making 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 claims, I wouldn't want to sell you insurance either. But when it comes to claims themselves, a lot of people correlate property insurance to health or life and death and dying. So it's not the same. So the short answer to the question is that I would not be concerned about filing a claim from Hurricane Ian and being dropped. If you're concerned about your rates going up, just look back to the last couple of years and did you have a hurricane claim then? Probably the answer is no. Even if you did, if you go and find an association that didn't, I can guarantee you their rates went up as well. So I love when people tell me that your rates are going up because you filed a claim, and I can go find 10 associations that haven't filed a claim in the last 5 years and their rates are up over 1,000%. So
to that point, Dan, Alberta and Jensen Beach asked a question along those lines. So let me interrupt you there. What impact will Ian have on the already atrocious insurance options that we have in Florida?
Well, if the legislature continues to do what it did this past legislation session, it will have I will say have no impact. It just, unfortunately, the market's just going to continue trending in a terrible direction it is. And I don't think it has anything to do with Hurricane Ian. This last special session basically allowed the insurance companies to raise rates and to mitigate coverage outside the four corners of your contract, which is an interesting conundrum. Suddenly now they can pay to repair roofs as opposed to replacing them, even though the building code would require the replacement of them. A lot of stupid things came out of that session for policyholders. I don't think it's that. I think what we need is people to get a little bit real about profiteering and reporting of financials by insurance companies. And if we got a little bit more serious about that and more repair on that, I think we'd see a little bit different insurance market.
All right, thank you. Zuly, Elizabeth in Clearwater asks, during hurricane warnings and evacuations, should condo elevators be stopped at the top and shut down?
Yeah, well, there are shutdown procedures, and the answer to that is definitely yes, depending on the association and the shutdown procedures. The answer is always going to be to take the necessary precautions to make sure that your mechanical equipment is safeguarded, and that the more precautions we take in advance of a hurricane, the faster we can bring all of your elevators and other mechanical systems up after a storm. And what we're seeing in the cases where that was not the case, we're having extensive damage in either elevators or other mechanical systems. And it may take longer for those elevators to either come back into operation or have to be repaired or replaced. So short answer is definitely we should follow the shutdown procedures for the mechanical systems as instructed.
And it doesn't have to be stopped at the top floor, but get it off the bottom floor, go up 3 levels at least, where you're not going to have
Prevent water, right?
Yeah, storm surge is going to affect it. And a couple other reasons why you want to do it. One is you don't want to have electrical problems, but secondly, you don't want to have anyone get stuck on the elevator when the power goes out. And especially if you're in an evacuation zone, the firemen, policemen, they're not coming. You could get stuck on you could get stuck on the elevator for a couple of days before you get out of there. If you're, if you keep your elevators running and you lose power and you're in an evacuation zone, that's about the worst thing you could probably do. And so, yeah, shut down your electrical equipment, protect it, and get it off the first floor. A lot of properties have lower level garages. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of cars lost from the storm because they had no place to put cars and they were parked below level. And we had a lot of properties where there were problems with that. Just a couple more questions. Dan, quickly, how does Bernard in Naples is asking, how will Senate Bill 4D be modified after Hurricane Ian? There's a lot of modifications that need to come out of it because there's clarity that needs to happen because we don't really all understand it. Those of us that understand things. So is there anything specifically from the hurricane that could affect SB 4D?
Yeah, so for policyholders that suffered roof damage, sadly, right now we're going to be on the recovery side of that bill. The real difficulty of that bill is what goes on thereafter. Most the bars, the actual plaintiff bar, after that Senate bill session, said that the changes made in that bill as it relates to insurance, while it was alleged that it would curb litigation, which was allegedly leading to all this increased cost of insurance, despite the fact that they could not produce the financial information to support any of those opinions, and then claim that wasn't due until 2023, despite it clearly stating it was due this year before the session. The changes to that legislation, what I fear is going to cripple a lot of people the next storm season, if a storm were to occur in these areas. Whereas because it was asked to the senator who authored the bill and published it and pushed for and promoted it about this idea that they no longer owe you to replace a roof, even though the building code standard for so many decades was that if 25% or more of the roof needed to be replaced in order to repair damage, then you need to replace it all new. And now suddenly this insurance bill is modifying that. And I go ahead and now I'm only paid to repair my roof, and I repair my roof, then how old is my roof now? Because I need to know how old my roof is going forward to determine how much money I'm going to get on my roof the next time I go around, because it's based on some crazy scale that someone came up with, some lobbyist came up with in some office room somewhere where no other logic existed. And trying to figure out the age of roof at that point is almost near impossible. And the senator was directly asked that by another senator who opposed the bill, said, well, how old is my roof? He goes, well, that's something we'll have to figure out. So that's the situation we're in right now. We don't have cheaper insurance rates. It's unclear as to what that means down the road. And so you have some of your plaintiff attorneys have published articles. One of them is the Merlin Law Group. You can go on their website. There's an article out there. It talks about it where it's like, okay, well, if my roof was damaged by wind and I only go to repair it, that voids the warranty of my entire roof. Even if I have that same roofing company come back, the material is void. So I'm clearly not restored to my pre-loss condition financially. So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for my association? If I no longer I'm clearly not restored to what I was before. So how do I cope with that situation? What is the answer? And the answer is litigation. To sue your insurance company to prove in court that what you had is not what they're giving you, and you're owed to be indemnified, put in a pre-loss condition financially. So again, the stupidity of the laws and the bills that were passed is certainly going to shine here. Typically, typical insurance claim following major disaster, 4 to 8 months. Litigation's about 8 months to a year and a half. So I'm going on record here. We're being recorded. Watch.
Henry, final
Watch.
question for you, Henry. I'm not going to ask lessons learned because we're still learning lessons. Probably too early to say what lessons did we learn from Hurricane Ian. We certainly learned some from Irma. We're still in the process of Ian. Is it too late, Henry, to dry out your property? Is it too late to call a water restoration company and say, I need some help. I need some and pull back my baseboards, cut into my walls. Tell me what's going on. If I lost my window of opportunity.
Sorry, light went out here. No, it's not too late. I mean, if you haven't had somebody out there and you're having doubts as to what to do, it's definitely never too late to get somebody out there. I mean, you got to have your property looked at. If you've got damage or if you're waiting on a certain vendor, that's not a good idea either. Just get somebody out there quick, and it's never too late. The work needs to be done, and the sooner the better, because if the longer you wait, the bigger the work becomes.
And Dan, is it too late to file a claim? Is it too late to call Dan Odess at Global Pro and say, man, you sound like you know what you're doing. You're a smart guy. I need help.
No, not at all. In fact, we're just getting started. I mean, we're getting calls every day. I mean, we've had dozens already today. We're going to keep on getting them. We're going to get them through the end of the year. We have the resource to be able to manage it. So it's going to keep happening. And to build on what Henry said, the reality of it is that on the mitigation side, access to areas has been so limited and so tough. Getting, materials, it doesn't, I just can't throw this stuff in a pickup truck. I know it hit at this property. Henry's WRG's out here doing an incredible job. And I mean, they have literally 2 tractor trailers. That's not easy to get in and out of areas, right? You need to have clear roads. You need to do this stuff. This stuff is just starting to happen. You're just starting to get clearer roads. I mean, I'm just starting. That doesn't mean the roads are clear. There's still areas we go in that are still 1 lane where there's still traffic because the debris is piled up, 2-3 stories tall. So, it's never late to start. And you're going to keep on finding damages for the good part of the next year. Will be, people will be calling us and dealing with it. It'll be maybe a little bit different because, certain opinions have been formulated or certain things have been done, but never too late to call us until the statute of limitations expires. But the sooner you do, the quicker we can get out there, document things, make sure, fix whatever has been reported or make sure it's accurately reported and get things documented for you moving in the right direction.
Okay, excellent. And then Zuly, last question for you is basically, you talked about communication being so important. Where are we from a communication standpoint? What more can be done for communication moving forward from where we are in recovery today?
So I think as both Henry and Dan have mentioned, we are really just at the beginning stages of this. So obviously keeping your communities informed of everything that is taking place is critical. Some of our residents are here, but many of our residents in many cases are not. So keeping them informed, making sure that they understand what resources are available to them if they need help in their individual units, also what's going on in the community, what access they have to resources, to vendors, to professionals, and on the management spectrum, what we as a management group are doing to help them as an association is critical. So making sure that the communication is there and often as possible, and also making sure that the board of directors, that you as a board of directors are continuing to meet as often as you can, so that the decisions that you are making are as transparent as possible, and that you feel that you are bringing in the necessary resources for Q&As, holding town halls if you need to. Obviously, we're in a very digital age. We can continue to host board meetings and town hall meetings virtually. So we should use that technology whenever possible to making sure that everyone is informed. The more informed we all are and our residents are, the calmer we can keep them.
Great, thank you. It's great advice. So I'm going to give everybody my number and my email address if you want to write it down. I know we've lost a lot of folks here, but you can call me. I will make sure that Dan and Henry are contacted. And if you need help, we'll be happy to do that. My best number is 954-815-8321. That's my cell phone, 954-815-8321. Please call me if you think you need help from some of the services represented here today, or you can email me at tokeefe, TOKEEFE at KWPMC.com. So please contact me if you can help. And thank you all so much for your time today. Thanks again for our great panelists, Dan Odess, President of Global Pro, Henry Dow, President of the Water Restoration Group, and Zuly Maribona, Senior Vice President for our own KW Property Management Company. Our hearts and well wishes go out to all Floridians that experienced significant losses from Hurricane Ian. We certainly hope that you can recover from the damages and return to the life you enjoyed in Florida prior to the storm. Thank you for listening. We will send out this recording. If you want to listen to it again, you want to share it with fellow board members. A lot of great information provided today, and you can find it at the KW website at kwpmc.com and our YouTube channel. Thank you all so much for listening. Stay safe, recover quickly, and be nice to your neighbors. From all of us at KW, we appreciate you. Take care and have a great rest of your week. Bye now.